At some point, most, if not all of us healthcare professionals will experience the vulnerability of being a patient. Depending on the circumstances, we emerge from these experiences with some new insight about what it's like to be a patient, and hopefully that positively impacts how we are when we go back to practicing clinical care. My guest today, Dr. J. Wellons, had a significant illness experience. The diagnosis, treatment, and the prolonged recovery time turned out to be quite transformative for him. In addition to many other changes, it reawakened a dormant interest in writing about and sharing inspiring patient stories. By way of introduction, Dr. Wellons is a professor of neurosurgery at the Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt, as well as medical director of the Surgical Outcomes Center for Kids, which he co-founded. In addition to his prolific scientific writing, he's been a contributor to the New York Times, Sunday Review, and Time magazine, to name just a few. His book, All That Moves Us, a pediatric neurosurgeon, his young patients, and their stories of grace, is one of the contributions to humanity that emerged as a result of his illness and recovery time. Dr. Wellons was also a guest on our other podcast, RX for Success number 172, and I highly recommend a listen. In this episode, Dr. Wellons and I talk about what it was like for him to be on the, quote, other side of the stethoscope, end quote, the impact that being a patient had on him existentially, and how this changed him as a physician and teacher, and even launched his writing. And for everyone who is or is considering parenthood, we talk about how to raise children so that they grow up to be compassionate adults. Please stay tuned. There are times in our lives that change the way we see the world. Navigating these challenges can take insight, trusted confidants, or even a coach. Let's explore those moments. In this companion podcast to RX for Success, we will discover ways to learn and write our own success stories together. I'm Dr. Dale Waxman, a physician coach with MD Coaches, and this is Life-Changing Moments. So, Dr. J. Wellons, welcome to Life-Changing Moments and the MD Coaches family of podcasts. Good to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming back. Just to get us started here today, for those that didn't tune in to the interview on the other podcast, RX for Success with Dr. Randy Cook, can you tell us where you are geographically and what you're doing professionally right now?
Well, Dale, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm at Monroe Carroll Jr. Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt, which is a mouthful, so sometimes we just say Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. I am the chief of the Division of Pediatric Neurosurgery. I'm also the vice chairman of the department, and I have been here for about 11 years or so. And currently I'm standing in my office overlooking about 6 inches of snow, which is not very common in the city of Nashville. So it's actually a little bit quiet, and I did use the Q word. So it is a little bit quiet right now, which is nice.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we are recording this in the middle of January when there's been some unseasonably wintry weather there in Tennessee.
Yes, indeed.
Well, just to kind of get us right into our topic for today, in your conversation with Randy, you talked about the path that led to reawakening a dormant desire to write a book about yours and your patients' experiences as a pediatric neurosurgeon. So I'd like to play just a section of that episode to get us to that point.
But it was my sister, Sarah, who basically said, you should write some of these stories down that you've been talking to us about. And I was like, yeah, I'll do it at some point, but I'm busy neurosurgeon. I got neurosurgery stuff to do. And then all of a sudden, I had a medical issue. The number of times that I'd sat at a computer or put films up for a family to see a tumor in the brain and telling them that we would need to take it out and we would need to, what it meant and was it benign or malignant and how long the child would be there and what the risks and benefits were from surgery. I just had that conversation hundreds of times. And all of a sudden, instead of me sitting there saying it, it was me sitting there listening to somebody tell me I had a tumor in my pelvis that looked like it was benign, but was going to need to be resected.
We know from that interview with Randy that time in recovery led to you having some time to write the book. What I'd like us to focus on, if you're okay with this, is something that didn't get talked about in that podcast, which was the physician as patient, what it's like to be on the other side of the stethoscope. And just wonder if you could share with us a little bit about what that was like when you are now the patient instead of being the physician sharing that story.
There's a movie, I can't remember when the movie came out, maybe in the 90s. It was called The Doctor, which was starring William Hurt. And he was a cardiac surgeon who was relatively brusque and began to have hemoptysis, blood when he would cough, and ultimately was noted to have throat cancer and underwent treatment and got to know a woman who had, I think, a stage 4 brain tumor and radiation. And then the transformation that he took from a brusque cardiac surgeon to a now very student-friendly and patient-oriented physician. My own journey is I will say that I did not. I love that movie. It's a great movie. But I didn't start out as a brusque. Sometimes when I was trying to figure out why all this was happening, I was, just kind of talking to the divine and saying, I was already a relatively compassionate person. What's the transformation that's needed here? When you have something that is an existential threat, it really does cause you to look back on the time that you spent on this earth and to look at the things you've spent time doing and putting together. And also, if you think that you've lived a worthwhile life of, what we're called to do, which is to be good people to one another and serve one another. That's what I believe. There's just no good way to have the news drop to you that you have a tumor in your pelvis. And for a week and a half or two, it looked like it was going to be the malignant kind, and it wasn't. And, I was fortunate, but I will tell you, I have gotten to know a lot of people who had a tumor, kind of in the pelvic region where it was malignant. And those friends are not here with us today. Sam Lloyd is one who was a wonderful Episcopal priest who worked at the National Cathedral and then retired up at Swanee, a wonderful close friend. And, I would sit with him sometimes when he would come up for chemotherapy. And I just remember not this sense of why not me or why me. It's just this sense of having this existential threat. It really forces you to think about your life in a way that's, like I said, have I been meaningful? So, after you kind of get over the existential threat part of it, for me, because it was a pretty sizable resection, I had to be on bed rest for about 2.5 months. And at the time, I was division director like I am now. I was vice chair of the department. I was program director for all the residents here in the Department of Neurosurgery. I had several research projects that were up and going and clinical outcomes research. So I was kind of going Mach 5, and to go from Mach 5, or a warp 9 to impulse power, just where you're just still is really shocking to your system. And, I always say there's only so much Netflix you can watch, and then your brain has to start doing something. So in the process of kind of moving through this existential threat with friends and with close Episcopal priest friends and a lot of good books, that people that have gone through similar type of situations before, I was able to move into this place where I have had a lot of blessings in this life. And part of the blessings in this life has been to take care of people at their just most vulnerable point and to really be able to help. And I thought that was so important. And so I wrote a funny piece, was the first piece that I wrote. And that came out in the New York Times Sunday Review. And I had a lot of emails from people saying, hey, that's a funny piece. Congratulations. People that I knew, in the pediatric neurosurgery world. And then my editor, and at the Times, a guy named Peter Catapano, he turns out his shtick was getting new writers to write more. And so Peter got me to write a serious piece. And that piece, the basic premise of that was that a young girl had been in a car accident and the weather was terrible. And ultimately it was a Black Hawk helicopter in the National Guard in Alabama that brought her to us. And then later on in the piece, she sent me a letter reflecting back how grateful she was, for all the people that had done all the things that it took to get her here. And I remember thinking how grateful I was to her, because it was so early in my career and I was learning how hard to push and, how much kids could recover and how many children since that point had really been affected by that. And when that piece came out, I had hundreds and hundreds of emails from people that I didn't know talking about hope. And it was right as the pandemic was starting to kind of rise its head a little bit. And so I really started thinking about how these children that I've had the opportunity to care for have been so resilient, and there's been so much grace, and they provide so much hope. I mean, yes, there is sadness, and yes, there is grief, but there's a lot of joy too. There's a great quote by Khalil Gibran, who's that Lebanese philosopher, wrote The Prophet. The poem is on sorrow and joy, and part of it he says, "Some of you say joy is greater than sorrow, and others say, nay, sorrow is the greater. But I say unto you, they are inseparable. Together they come, and when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed." So really there's so much of this kind of joy and grief together that I decided to start categorizing some of the stories that had occurred over the point of my life. So that's a very long-winded way of saying that, kind of taking the existential thread, taking the pushing by my sister to write some of these stories down, and then having the time, because I was basically gone from Mach 5 to still, and then seeing what some of these children had gone through and how most of them or many of them had come out through it resilient, with such resilience, or the parents with such resilience. That was kind of the equation that ultimately led to me writing the book.
Are you a doctor struggling to provide the best care for your patients while dealing with financial and caregiving matters out of the scope of your practice? Do you find yourself scrambling to keep up with the latest resources and wish there was an easier way? Then this virtual caregiver conference resource will save you time, money, and sanity by giving you all the resources and information your patients need in one place. This conference helps you and your patients enlist the best strategies around healthcare resources and the best financial steps for your patients while navigating tricky caregiving situations. You don't have to go home feeling frustrated and helpless because you couldn't connect your patients with the best services. Find out more at rxforsuccesspodcast.com/conference or click the link in the show's notes. You don't want to miss this caregiver resource.
Today's episode is brought to you by Eagle Financial Group. Eagle Financial Group is here to help you understand your numbers and to make wise decisions. Whether it's fractional CFO services, accounting, bookkeeping, payroll, or tax strategies and preparation, Eagle Financial Group is your partner to ensure that your practice keeps on serving your patients and gives you more time to spend with your family and friends. It's time that you overcome your obstacles and get control of your financial life today. Give Eagle Financial Group a call at 719-755-0043. Drop us an email at clientservices@eaglefsg.com or visit us online at eaglefsg.com. We are a proud sponsor of the MD Coaches family of podcasts.
I can't help but noticing that you experienced this existential threat and it triggered you to be writing stories about patients' existential threat as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And was that a parallel that you noticed at the time as well?
Well, I think it's just, when you've been brought to the edge, you can't help but there's like a badge that you wear, and you can look and like you feel a real sense of familiarity. I mean, like I was saying before, is that, like, what's the reason for this, God? I'm already pretty compassionate, but boy, does it change the way that you look at people. No longer do you loom over people and kind of make suggestions or make decisions for them. And it's more like sitting next to them and having empathy for what they are going through and making decisions with them. And I think that had a pretty profound impact on me. I think, anytime that when I sit with a patient who has a brain tumor or a blood vessel malformation or some other type of diagnosis that is just not expected, even an intrauterine ultrasound that shows spina bifida that needs to be corrected with intrauterine surgery. I can really understand that kind of that heavy weight that people can get inside their chest, because I have felt that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that, and I wanted to get to that, was how did this change you as a clinician? And you already mentioned there was a shift from compassionately maybe talking to now talking with, more of a shared decision making. Can you say a little bit more about that? Can you give us some language behind how that, if I were watching you before and I'm watching you after your illness, what would I be noticing that's different?
Well, I had a long email from one of my patients who, the young boy needed about 4 different operations for something that he was born for. It just was a stepwise fashion. And this email came to me about 5 weeks ago. And she basically said, I don't remember what it is that happened to you or what it is that you had, but I'm glad that you made it through it, Dr. Wellons. And it changed you. And the way that you talk to us and the way that you talk to me changed. It's like you understood more. And that's the only way I know how to describe it. I just think I understand more where people that are frightened come from, or somebody that has pain. You can say all you want to about understanding pain, but until you have pain yourself that you can't squirm around in bed and get away from, you really don't understand pain until you have that. And so I do feel changed, and I do feel like a camaraderie with patients, just like I'm one of them, but I'm also been given the ability to help them. And so it's kind of my responsibility to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. What it makes me also wonder about, because I know that you're involved in an educational program. You're program director for the neurosurgery residency,
I will say I'm now program director emeritus, which is an even nicer position to be in, because I get to say that I was program director, but I don't have to do all the paperwork.
That's great. And are you still involved in teaching?
Yes, all the residents got together couple of years ago, 2 years ago, and nominated me for the McCleary Award, which is the Master Teacher Award for all the surgeons at Vanderbilt. And I was awarded that about a year and a half ago. And that was a huge honor for me, just because I think you can win awards and get all types of things, but when you get something from your people that you teach, I think that's the most meaningful, because it really says that what you've done has been important to them. And then the outgoing chief resident, kind of in a very clandestine manner, sent me the letter that they sent in for the nomination, and that's something I'll keep forever. That was incredibly meaningful.
Yeah, congratulations to you. And to that end, I'm imagining that some of the lessons that you impart to them, that's not just surgical technique, especially around what we're now talking about, are part of the reason for that award. And I'm wondering, what, if anything, you can pull from your experience as a patient, do you impart to your learners?
I think I openly talk about it. I mean, I still have pain on and off, and I think maybe previous generations would have been open about that. I certainly don't walk around and say, "Hey, I'm Jay, I've got pain all the time." But sometimes it flares up, and sometimes it's worse than others. But sometimes I can just be open about it, and people ask, talk to them about it, and say, these things happen from time to time, and you could either go to the existential way, like this is a fallen world, and that therefore things are imperfect, or you can just go to this is what happens as you get older, and things happen to your body, and things grow, and you have to get them taken out, and there's some secondary consequences of that. But I think being open about that with residents, but also showing compassion, trying to model compassion for them to patients that have pain. Sometimes people that have pain can be shuffled along the medical, it's like a centipede upside down with the legs moving, it's just something gets shuffled along the legs, and so well, I can't help this person in pain. I'm going to have to keep doing my work. But maybe being able to dig in and say, you know what, I know that this patient's come to me with a 2-inch deep stack of information from other hospitals that have a history, and that they're looking for secondary or tertiary or quaternary opinion. And, instead of recoiling from that, really it's leaning into that and saying, I think I'm really good at helping people that are in those kind of situations, in our pediatric neurosurgery world. So I think modeling that's probably the most important thing. I think being open about it, like, okay, guys, rounds needs to be done by 10 on Sunday because I have to get to my very favorite yoga class because that is really helpful for me, and everybody's like, we got to get Wellons to yoga, which is great and fun, but that is important to me. And so I think having those discussions about wellness is important, but then also modeling it so that residents can see that compassion really does make a difference.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview.
And speaking of compassion, that makes me want to talk about something else that came up in the RX for Success podcast with Randy. You were talking about your draw to pediatric neurosurgery, and one of the parts that you mentioned was that you grew up in a household in which compassion was demonstrated, it was modeled, and it was also expected. And I'm just curious, for the parents out there, what was it like in say some more about that. What was your family like? How did that get modeled? How did it get expressed?
Yes. Well, so I grew up in a small town of Columbia, Mississippi, about 12,000 in the whole county. So the town itself was about, I think, 5,500 or so. We went to a small Episcopal church that had 25 members, but there were large other churches in the community, just like, many towns in the South. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was very involved in the church. My dad was president of a company, and then also had his whole time in the Air National Guard, in which he was had various leadership positions, including the head of the Air National Guard group in Meridian, Mississippi, which was about an hour and a half away. At the time was a colonel, and then when he retired, was retired as a 2-star general. So that was a big part of his life. But I think a lot of the compassion that I saw in my mom. I mean, my dad was certainly a compassionate person. I mean, he was not the great Santini, in terms of being a fighter pilot and an overt amount of bravado. He was a wonderful person who was very much about self-actualization. But I think it really was my mom that showed me the compassion. She, for a 2-year stint, was president of the National Episcopal Church Women group. To see her model compassion and care for children at risk, for example, which was something that she started in Mississippi, and then that grew to be able to be a fundraising effort and a way to help that, children who were coming out of homes that were broken, and, how to help them make sure that they don't, fall far behind in school and fall far behind in life. I can remember, around Christmas every year, she would say, it's time for us to go shopping for this certain family that we had connected with. And so we would, I wouldn't want to go, I was like, Mom, come on, it's Christmas, I don't want to go. And then she would make me go, and we would go get food and clothes and toys, and then come home and wrap it, and then take it to this one family who lived in a trailer out deep in kind of the woods of South Mississippi, and they didn't really have a Christmas. And the mom was mentally impaired, and the dad had some issues with alcohol addiction, and there were 2 little children in that trailer. And so, every Christmas or Easter holiday, my mom would make sure that family had something for their children and something to celebrate. I saw that over the years, and then went off to boarding school, went off to college, then went to medical school, and then residency, and then had 10 years of my career at UAB. And then a few years into my time here at Vanderbilt, my mom was diagnosed with lymphoma. And after a few years of treatment, it recurred, and then she passed away. And at the viewing, there was a woman there with her child. And we kind of knew, my 2 sisters and I knew all the people that were there, but we didn't know who that woman was. And so ultimately we finally came, and I just introduced myself to her. And she was the little girl who had grown up in that trailer. And she remembered my mom and had kept up with my mom. And now she had a job and a home and a husband and a house, and was really quite successful in this life, and was just wanted to be there to show her love and respect for my mom. And I just had a tremendous effect on me, because that was 25, 30 years later from those days when, maybe even longer, like 35 years later from those days when we did that. And to see the effect that degree, just simple compassion and love and empathy can have on someone's life, just one person's life, boy, that's a really important thing. So
very powerful.
It was something to model all around my house, really.
Yeah, very powerful. That was paying it forward before that became a household phrase. Yeah. Wow. No,
I was just going to say, my own kids, they were fortunate to have 4 grandparents who, who had compassion in their lives. My wife's mother was an academic psychologist, and she worked with disabled children. My wife's father was a Court of Appeals judge in Mississippi, saw kind of his work in his church and then in his community and his work. So none of the 4 are with us anymore, but my children certainly have, that passed on to them, that they see as something that's important. And that's important to me and my wife, for them to see that and make sure that that's something that they take forward too.
I just have a final set of questions about this, for especially you're a medical educator, you're working in an academic center, and even if just being in the healthcare system in general, we all know that that's not, compassion isn't the focus of everybody who becomes a healthcare professional. There's some people are motivated by the being a technician. Some people are motivated by the cognitive stimulation of figuring out a puzzle, and don't really necessarily connect with patients. I'm curious whether you noticed yourself being different than some of your colleagues or classmates, or whether even if your being compassionate with patients may not have been seen as a strength during your training. I'm just curious about that.
Oh, that's a good point. I mean, I'll write about it a little bit in the book, but I went into medicine, to really try to understand the human condition. I was an English major at University of Mississippi. I had had some amazing teachers, Ellen Douglas and Barry Hanna, some wonderful Southern writers. I kept thinking to myself that, going into medicine would be a way to help people, but would also help me understand the human condition more. And, boy, is that the case, right? I mean, you really do get that. But yes, in medical school, I think probably most in residency, because you're just so busy. Back in those days, there were no work hour restrictions. So we really were residents of the hospital, and to make a human connection with people, it was really these fleeting moments, these kind of micro moments, holding the hand of a dying man in the emergency room under the blanket, so nobody would see that, having to compassionately tell somebody that their husband is not going to wake up, or that their child is going to be forever paralyzed. Believe it or not, there are ways to do that are quite cold. And that news of those things is never easy to deliver, but there are ways that you can deliver it. I think I've learned over the years, and again, I try to let my residents see, where you just kind of open your up and say, I'm just so sorry this has happened, and if I could take this away, I would in a second. Just ways that you can take some things from your past and use it to care for the patients that you're seeing in front of you, and then hope that the people that are with you pick that up and move that forward.
Yeah, nice. Well, thank you, Jay. Really appreciate your taking the time to be back with us and sharing your story of origins of compassion, but then also how that really deepened with your own experience. And hopefully people don't have to have their own illness experience to arrive there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Would not want that for people. We need compassion for compassion's sake alone. It's like, what is Gandhi? Gandhi says the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, And I think that is a really wonderful way to maybe summarize what we're trying to talk about.
And that's a beautiful summary for this podcast. Yeah. So, Dr. Jay Wellons, thank you again so much for coming back and being with us and imparting some more words of wisdom in addition to those that you've already put out there in various places that you have. So thank you again.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Great to be here.
Thank you for tuning in to Life-Changing Moments. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to rate us 5 stars and leave a review. Doing so helps our podcast reach more listeners. Have something to share? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Visit the MD Coaches community on Facebook groups. This dynamic virtual space is a place to continue discussion about life-changing moments and perhaps share some life-changing moments of your own. Join the conversation today.